Ilya, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Today I'm really excited to speak with Ilya Strebulaev.
Great piece of academic work here.
Alex Dank is a venture builder. He is a CEO, a McKinsey partner, and he's the author of The Venture Mindset. Welcome to the show, Alex.
As an investor, the last thing you want is to throw good money after bad money. In fact, the smartest decisions are never fast. You just prepare yourself for this decision. Venture mindset, simply put, is just a new way of thinking, a new mental model.
You might have noticed that we have recently published an article for HBR, Harvard Business Review.
I think all of us can actually benefit from this venture mindset.
Wow, that was kind of a
Hello,
intro.
everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody. Great seeing everybody. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers and Asad and his team. That is an amazing event.
What a crowd.
And what we're going to do today is slightly different. What we're going to do today is based on all of our work together, on Alex's work with many companies, on my work with thousands of Stanford students who became founders, venture capitalists, who became executives in large companies, on our work with the various regulators, policymakers. What we're going to do is identify 10 most important mistakes, most important myths that exist that is related to the venture mindset, so that nobody in this audience can make the same mistakes when they make important decisions. And this is based on the Venture Mindset book that I'm very glad to mention is now available in the Kazakh language and in the Korean language, and hopefully will be available soon in many, many other languages. Okay, so it is time to bust 10 myths. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about many facts, and we'll try to bust those myths. So if you're a founder, if you're an investor, angel investor, venture capitalist, if you're a corporate senior executive, or if you're a policymaker, please pay particular attention. And this is going to be based on the principles of the venture mindset. So founders, the first myth is for you, that I observe my MBA students at Stanford making all the time before they come to my class, is that they believe that one size fits all. This is the illustration of this one size fits all. You can go and check thousands of pitch decks. And many founders ask me, Professor, what is the best pitch deck that I can use to create my pitch deck so that I can attract the investor? And the answer is that while those pitch decks are useful, you should create your own. There are certain facts which are important, but every single pitch deck should reflect what is your unfair advantage. So this word, these two words, unfair advantage, is something that is critical, important for the founders. I've just had Roloff Bota from Sequoia Capital in my MBA class. And I asked him, Roloff, unfair advantage, how would you describe this to founders? And he turned to my MBA students and said, I'm going to ask it differently. I'm going to say it differently. He said, why you? So that is the critical answer, critical question, the answer to which will determine how you're going to prepare your blurb, how you will talk about yourself, how you will describe your pitch, and how you prepare your pitch deck. So don't start with the pitch deck. Start with answering this critical question. Why this is the case? Because home runs in the venture capital world matter and strikeouts don't. So this is from my research. If we look at all the venture bets that ever been made in this country, and there's more than 120,000 companies that received venture capital money in the last 50 years. Here are statistics for you. Out of typical 20 bets, 15 are going to fail. Several more will get 2x to 4x, and there's going to be only one investment statistically out of 20 that will return 10x, 50x, or 100x. And on the right, you will see the outcome of those 20 investments. That outcome is the fund returner for the venture capitalist is only one investment. So therefore, do your homework before you meet with a venture capitalist. Every single venture capitalist, every single smart venture-minded venture capitalist will ask themselves the question, how can this investment, this startup, this fund that I'm meeting right now, can be my fund returner? If they don't believe that you can become 100x in the best possible case for them, they will not be interested in continuing the conversation. So here is something important that, in my experience, many founders do not ask. How often do you ask, if you are founders, when you meet with venture capitalists, what is your fund size? In which part of the investment cycle this fund is? Is it the beginning of the investment period, at the end of the investment period? What is the performance of the existing portfolio companies? What is the investment thesis of the fund? Do your due diligence. Because venture capitalists, different venture capitalists will approach the same startup in a very different way. A $50 million fund will approach it differently from a $1 billion fund. And try to advocate right away your unfair advantage. And make sure that you don't try to sell your startup right away, meaning that your task is not to ensure that the venture capitalist will invest in you the very moment you're going to meet with him or with her. Your goal is to ensure that the venture capitalist will be hooked to meet with you again, to continue due diligence. So that is the critical consideration. So whenever you even do a cold outreach, think about just 2 paragraphs. Or whenever you meet here at the conference, think about 30 seconds that the venture capitalist will want to meet with you again. And again, think about why unfair advantage, and what information can I provide so that the smartest VCs would like to meet with you again.
If I may add one more point to the previous slide, is that we're all familiar, and founders are very familiar with due diligence. And they're ready to be due diligenced, to be analyzed and reviewed. The key point here is that you may want to do your due diligence of a venture capital fund that you plan to meet with. Understand the size, understand the psychology. Have they already returned the fund? Then their risk appetite might be higher. So do your due diligence. Due diligence in this particular game is a 2-way process. And myth number 2, a very important one. I have received so many decks from startup founders, and every single one of them would ask, how do I make sure that the VC would invest in my startup? And the answer, now we have the answer, thanks to Ilya's team and the research. There is no silver bullet. There is no one. There is no specific area where VCs source their great deals from. Actually, you may have a look, and now we now have statistics based on the survey that Ilya's team conducted, that the source of these deals could be coming from pretty much anywhere, from other investors, from portfolio companies of a VC, from even cold call emails. And some of you participated in our workshops, and you guys learned, at least many of you said that that was a shocking information that, hey, actually cold emails may also work. Even if you ask a VC, herself or himself, do you actually read cold emails? And the answer will be probably no. The challenge here is that now we know, the fact is that they do, and the open rate is pretty high. It may reach to 15%, meaning that VCs are interested in learning more. They do believe in these kind of a chance. That's why they, from time to time, do check their spam inbox, and maybe you should do as well, because maybe some of the greatest ideas are stored there. So the bottom line is there is no single source, but it also means that you may have to work really, really hard and explore all pathways. And in the VC game, all the pathways are all about being prepared and networking. And the network is not happening in your office. Networking is happening outside of your office. And some VCs may literally meet you in their rug store. Some of you already had a chance to read the book. They know the story. Many startups, including Dropbox, may not even happen without that kind of a meeting in a rug store. Or take Paul Arnold. I will be visiting his VC and his LPs next week. He applied a completely different approach. He used a quantifiable approach. He looked through the data. He created very sophisticated mathematical AI models, which are picking and choosing the most promising startups globally. More importantly, he published a very good article where he outlined, if you want to be a successful VC, you have to pick your advantage. What's his advantage? Sourcing. So as you can see, different VCs use different pathways, different sources. Use them all as a startup founder. Do not rely on a piece of advice from a single session that this is the only pathway that would work. No. Now we know you can get the great idea from anywhere. Myth number 3. If you guys are working really hard as you're preparing the pitch deck on your Excel files, my piece of advice, stop. Just stop now. Why? Because there is one particular slide which is so often is missing in pitch decks. Here's the slide. It is the slide about the team. Too often, that slide may deserve only the last page on the deck. I actually reviewed the pitch deck this morning from a pretty famous celebrity lady who had a very senior position, and she dealt a lot with startups. Do you know what was her number 2 slide after the first page? That was her, not a CV, but presenting herself and her team. It is critically important to mention your team, and here's why. Every VC, they do understand that whatever you propose to do now, it is not the product that most likely you plan to release. It's a very early stage to launch any idea, meaning that most likely you will face so many challenges on the way. Therefore, you actually invest in the team. To some extent, you want to make sure that that team will solve all the problems that the team will face. And here are some stats.
So before the stats, here is interesting stuff from my recent research. Do you know how VCs look at pitch decks on DocSend? They open the DocSend, they enter their email, then they check the second slide. If they don't see what they expect to see, they go right away to the very end. Because very often the team slide is at the very end. And then most VCs check out. The median VC spends less than 15 seconds on your pitch decks. And that is because they don't see what they want to see on the second slide. Make sure that your second slide contains not the numbers, but the team information.
And again, here's the statistics. What is the biggest factor in success? Now we know it is the team. If a VC was asked, what is the factor? What is the most important piece that made that particular startup successful? It is the team. More importantly, when Ilya's team asked, what about the failure? Here's the response. On the next slide, you will see that the reason for the failure is also the team. Again, I would highly recommend you, if you want to know more details about that, read in the book as well as you can read the research because, of course, it varies. And on the next slide, you will see that it will vary industry by industry. Of course, biotech companies will rely more on IP and do what is about your business model, because as we were interviewing many VCs, one VC basically said, hey, biotech is not just about making sure that your drug or small molecule is so great. It's also about defending that business. That's why they do pay attention to what kind of IP and licensing agreements you have in place. Late stage is different from early stage. Early stage, you do invest in the team just because there is no product yet. That's still to be developed. Late stage is a completely different game. Team starts to be less important. They would expect to see professional management within the leadership. So it will vary. There is only one thing that will not vary. Team is always number one.
And one important comment for founders here. Notice that we do not say founders on this slide. And others do not use the word founders very often. Even though you hear founder to product fit or founder to market fit, in fact, the word team is more important than the founder. So many VCs, when they analyze the founders, they analyze the founding team. They look at who else behind the founder is in fact doing the work. Here's a quick example. My friend Alex Rampel, who is a senior partner now at Andreessen Horowitz, always looks at the founding teams, so he always requires the team members to be present. And he looks at whom the founders could have attracted to follow them. And if the founder of an early stage startup, without access to great resources, maybe yet without a product, succeeded in attracting a great team that immediately piques his interest. It's almost the same with many other VCs. It's about the team. So, to summarize so far, first, answer the question, why you? Because the VCs are interested not just in ideas, but in the founders and founding teams who are going to implement those ideas. Second is try to identify why VCs could be interested in you depending on their characteristics, not just on your features. And third, try to think about the best team that you can assemble. Those for the founders. Now let's go for investors here. I know that there's hundreds of investors here. And I've been quite lucky at Stanford because I had an opportunity to study more than now 3,000 venture investors in great detail. And if any investor here ever invested in an institutional deal in a venture-backed company, you are in my data set, your firms, your funds, and you yourself. So I know quite a lot about you. Now, many investors think, and I know this because they're always asking me, so you're studying unicorns. How can we identify unicorns? So one idea is that founder's resume reveals a unicorn founder. And mostly it's a myth. Now, to get to this myth, or to get to the finding that it's a myth, a lot of research needed to be done. So we assembled at the Venture Capital Initiative at Stanford the data on every single American unicorn. And by the way, now we're expanding globally. We now have the data on every single venture-backed company that became unicorn in the last 10 or 15 years. But this is going to be a study on American unicorns. Now, academic credentials do help, and I'm happy to report that my students, my former students, and the graduates from the Stanford Graduate School of Business are up there. What this shows is that out of each 1,000 MBA alumni at the Stanford GSB, and I know that some of you are here, we have on average about 4.2 unicorn founders. And it's much higher than at other places such as Harvard, MIT, Berkeley, but those places are also pretty good. So academic credentials do help, especially if you come from, in this case, the top business schools. But in fact, what is hidden here is that there is a huge variation. There's a lot of founders from business schools that are not on this average. So if you are not from this top business school, from a top school, then it's, in fact, in totality, you also have a very, very decent chance of becoming a unicorn founder. Some statistics may surprise you. They did surprise me. Where can you find unicorns? Well, California is up there. 1 in 72 venture-backed companies in California become unicorns, so with a post-money valuation of more than $1 billion. But Utah is ahead. If anybody is from Utah, I'm sure that you've heard the statistics. When I published this on my LinkedIn, I got about 150 messages from Utah in one day. So in Utah, if you become a venture-backed company in Utah, the probability of becoming a unicorn is 1 in 61. And trust me, 72 or 61 is a huge difference. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why the Utah venture ecosystem is growing up. Because many VCs know that there's a high chance of catching a unicorn there, so they're relocating there, opening their branches. What about the age of unicorn founders? The short answer is that while indeed unicorn founders are younger than the average in the population, there's a huge distribution. So just by knowing your age, I in fact would not really be able to predict whether you're going to be unicorn founder or not, with a high probability or with a low probability. What about country of birth? This is going to be statistics on American unicorn founders, which means founders of US-based venture-backed unicorns. And this is statistics that I think we really should know, especially because there is so much talk about immigration in this election cycle. 44% of the founders of all US unicorns were born outside the United States. So they're immigrants. And many, many more, out of 56% who were born in the US, are second-generation immigrants, so that their parents came to the United States and were born somewhere else. And this is top 10 countries, and I do hope very much that by the time I'm going to update these statistics, some of the Central Eurasia countries are going to be here. What about former employers? That is one of the most interesting questions, because the question is whether experience matters. And the answer is, again, it does matter. It does matter. So that in data-driven analysis, whether you are worked at Google is important. So for example, 105 founders of US unicorns did work at Google prior to them founding that unicorn. But then there are many other companies. Yahoo, Hewlett-Packard, Cisco, McKinsey. So some companies that might not come to mind right away. And then, what I think maybe is more interesting is the companies that you might have expected on the list and are missing. So this data is really interesting, but again, it's showing a very large variation. The data leads to predictability, but also shows a great variation.
Although the very first time when I had a chance to see that slide, I became super happy. Hey, McKinsey actually increases the chances of launching a fantastic, successful startup that may become a unicorn. Well, then if you go deeper, then you clearly understand that, okay, this may improve your chances, but the variability of data and data points is so huge that to some extent, everyone can launch a unicorn. And just by simply looking at the resume of a human being, of a person, of a founder, from a founding team, okay, that guy worked at Google, this is the right age. There is no such thing. It just improves statistics bit by bit.
So there are many, many data points. Many are useful, many are surprising, many are difficult to find. So I publish all of this on my LinkedIn. We're going to publish various pieces and articles. We also now published, my team and I, what we call the Unicorn Report, that effectively in one place combines all the data we know about unicorn founders, and the next edition also will include the unicorn investors. So everything we know about the background, the characteristics, the features of unicorn investors. So if you're interested, have a look at the Unicorn Report.
And well, before we go on, I have to make a comment, which is mentioned in the book, but probably the happiest day for Ilya was when his daughter came to him and said that, hey, Daddy, everyone in my class, how old was she at that then?
5.
5. Everyone in my class, in my group, want to meet with you. Why? They know that you are a unicorn researcher.
No. That is not the real story. The real story is my daughter came to me and said, Daddy, you're very popular in my school because I told everybody that you're the world leading unicorn researcher. But the funniest thing actually happened 2 weeks later. I went to that elementary school, or kindergarten school, and to help with the fair, with the multinational fair, okay? And the principal approached me. His name was Mr. Bates. And the principal approached me and said, "Oh, you are Elizabeth's dad." And I said, "Yes, Mr. Bates." And he said, "Right, you are unicorn expert, right?" And I said, "Yes, Mr. Bates." And he said, "Oh, right, I would like you to come and talk to our 5-year-olds about unicorns. I think they will love it." So at that very moment, I realized that not only my daughter's friends, but also Mr. Bates, the principal, was thinking about different unicorns, but I decided not to.
On a serious note,
not to disappoint him.
On a serious note, you can. The report contains 200 pages of detailed research, and Ilya's team will enrich the data set with global unicorns as well. So stay tuned. Subscribe to his LinkedIn because all the research results will be published there. But if you're not patient or if you want to have it in one place, here's the place. Okay, one more myth. And actually, interestingly enough, we mentioned that myth in our book as well as an example of some investors are writing checks on the spot. Actually, this happens quite often. Sometimes an angel investor, after just flipping through the deck and meeting with the founder, is ready to write a check. It could be a relatively small check if you compare that to VC checks, but still it happens. The problem is that it doesn't happen that often. And you have to be ready for that as founders, and as investors, you may want to rethink your approach if you're writing a check on the spot. Why? Here's why. Here are the results. First of all, numbers. Now we know how many hours, on average, are spent on a typical due diligence by a VC. This number, 118 hours, could be a kind of a shocker. Like, seriously, that much? Yes, this is the average number, and Ilya's co-teacher may even name a larger number that he spends, higher number that he spends reviewing his opportunities. So here's the deal. Why VC would spend 118 hours, and sometimes you may see an immediate response via email, like, "No, we're not interested in this. Please keep us informed. Let's stay in touch." Because there are two different minds. We write a lot about in the book, but in a nutshell, you have two different minds. As an investor, you may apply this mindset as well. Fast mind and slow lane mind. In fast one, you just review out of these 100 deals which come to your mailbox, you just review and filter out 10%. That's 10% you will review in detail, and that's where you will spend 118 hours. For the rest, unfortunately, for founders who are rejected, you may fall into that category of an immediate reaction. Read more about that in the book, how to develop your fast mind and why it's so important to review the funnel of the deals. But this mindset allows VCs avoid many mistakes. And I'm sure you've all heard about this big disaster. And it's often used as an example of, hey, that's the way that Silicon Valley operates and all these VCs are doing the wrong thing. The truth is that majority of smart VCs who had some experience in health tech or biotech rejected the deal.
Not the majority, everybody.
Everyone. We actually interviewed some of these investors, and some quotes I will let Ilya to use as a quote because we laughed for quite a while when we received that one.
Here's one of my favorite quotes. That's at the bottom. It says partner at VC firm, but let me tell you that it was a guy called David Singer, who is a general partner at Maverick Capital. And he told me, he looked at Tyrannus. In fact, his LPs called him and told him, "Why didn't you invest in Tyrannus? Because you are investing in healthcare." They pressured him to invest in Tyrannus. And he looked at, and this is what he concluded. If they, meaning the board of Tyrannus, if they wanted to invade Europe, it was the right group of people. because that group contained the former secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, and so on. But I didn't see any expertise at the company in building a sophisticated healthcare business. So David Singer from Maverick passed, and in fact, more than 30 other venture capitalists looked at Theranos. I'm sure that their LPs pressured them to invest, and every single one of them passed. And that's interesting because I think it tells you a lot about the venture mindset, is the power of this 118-hour decision rule.
And look, if you look at the deck of Theranos, which is now publicly available, you can have a look at it. It's a pretty impressive deck. It contains lots of information, promising technology, lots of clients or promising potential clients. What Bill Maris did, he just asked someone from his team to go and test it and try it. And the result was kind of disappointing. Basically, what was promised in the deck was not true. So we'll have to make sure that there are failures, and we talk a lot about failures, and that's part of any risky business, venture capital industry included. Anytime you deal with innovative stuff, you have to be ready to fail. But this is a different kind of a failure. This is a different kind of a mistake. So do your due diligence. If you are afraid of spending 100 hours to do that, probably, most likely, you're in the wrong business.
Okay, let's go to myth number 6. And that is true not only about VCs, even though VCs are particularly subject to this, but it's important for any groups that make decisions. The myth is that consensus is crucial among partners, and that is the myth. In fact, research clearly indicates that consensus is not a good idea when it comes to VC decision-making and also to any decision-making when you face large degree of uncertainty, when you face disruptive innovation. So if you look at, over the last many, many years, 50 years, at all the venture capital firms, and you split them into high IPO firms, which means that those firms who had the highest IPO rate among their portfolio companies, and then compare them to the low IPO VC firms, those VC firms that had the lowest rate. It turns out to be that one of the big differences between the high IPO and low IPO is how they were making decisions internally. And more specifically, the high IPO VC firms, on average, were much less likely to follow consensus, to follow unanimity. I already mentioned Alex Rampell, and he says it very well. Conviction must beat consensus. In fact, amazingly enough, in some venture capital firms, when every single partner, every single member of the investment committee is very, very, very excited to invest, they don't. Or they say, let's do more due diligence, we're going to discuss this tomorrow. Because they think that if everybody wants to invest, either it is so obvious that the deal is likely going to be overvalued, and therefore we're going to lose money on average, or maybe it is so obvious that everybody already saw it, we're late to the game, or maybe it is not obvious at all, and we just have not seen something important. I went from one famous venture capital firm to another, and in every single one I saw this implemented in life, which is conviction beats consensus every single time. When Alex and I go to large companies, then in fact, very often we observe exactly the opposite. The decisions are made only and only when everybody around the table is complacent, feels okay about the decision. And very often when it's about venture, when it's about innovation, it's a bad decision-making process. So let me give you a couple of specific examples of how venture capitalists make decisions within their partnerships. On the left is an example of Venrock, one of the most storied venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. It's been around for more than 50 years. And we have here Cami Samuels and her managing partner, Brian Roberts. So here's an interesting story about Venrock. Brian laughs about it when he tells us the story. Many of LPs ask them, how do you make decisions in your investment committee? And his response is, we don't have an investment committee. So think about an investment firm that does not have an investment committee. And the reason behind this is that they have 6 or 7 partners. They have Monday partner meetings where they discuss deals. And let's say Cami comes in and pioneers a deal. She's going to present the deal to that entire partnership meeting. And every single partner will become a devil's advocate. We'll try to see why this deal might not work. We'll ask a lot of probing questions. But then at the end of the day, the pioneer, in this case Cami, will have to make her own decision. So that is the extreme case of the absence of consensus. If one partner is convinced, that partner has the right to make a decision on behalf of the entire partnership. You might be surprised by this, but if we look at returns, Venrock, fund after fund, has been in top 10% of all the funds of their vintage.
I should add to this, because as we were interviewing Brian, we asked, why do you think this model works? And his response was, first of all, that's a lot of responsibility and ownership for that specific single partner who will have to make a call. But there is another factor in play. Only that type of partners who are ready to make such calls will come to Venrock. Meaning that they cannot just now point to other partners, oh, well, we all guys made such a call. No. It's either your win or your miss. Obviously, they discuss it all together, but everyone knows who actually missed the deal or got the wrong one or got the great one. It's a self-selection. That's why when you go back to your organizations, think about the next meeting. If within that meeting you see that everyone wants to agree with each other and that it's going to be about the consensus, most likely that kind of team will underperform in any innovative related stuff and decisions.
On the right is an example of another type of venture firm. It's a corporate venture capital firm, M12. It's a Microsoft corporate venture fund. It was founded and designed by Nagraj Kashyap, who is shown here. And Nagraj designed it in a very interesting way. There are a lot of elements, but one that I would like to pay particular attention to right now is called anti-veto rule. Now, we all heard about veto rule. Anti-veto is exactly the opposite, and it's very counterintuitive. So, Nagraj, as the boss, as the chairman of M12's investment committee, so M12 has investment committee, does not have the right to veto any deal that his team, the majority of his team, wants to proceed with. He himself told the team, I have no veto right. If you would like to invest, more than half of you, we will go ahead. But Nagraj has the anti-veto right, which means that if everybody else, or if the minority of the team, want to proceed with the deal, which means that the deal is off, or would be off in most organizations, Nagraj has the right to proceed with the deal. Interestingly enough, if you look at the most successful deals of M12, it turns out to be that almost all of them are proceeded either because of the lack of the veto rule or because of the anti-veto rule that Nagraj introduced. So those are just 2 examples of how you can generate lack of consensus, thoughtful, meaningful lack of consensus in your group decision-making process.
Okay, now it's turn to debunk one more myth now about the corporate leaders. And this is the slide that we often start our discussion with corporate clients and bigger organizations. They all ask, hey, Alex, you worked at Amazon. What's in it inside? How do you guys make such phenomenal bets which become fantastic companies? How do you pick such ideas from the very beginning which become then unicorns internally? or huge profit makers? Here's the answer. Actually, there's so many ideas evaluated and reviewed at Amazon, and majority of these ideas are addressing core business. Think of random thousands of A/B tests conducted on the web lab platform, or launching a free one-day delivery. All of these are just continuation of what the company is already doing, and this constant testing. However, there is a next layer, and I was leading a few of these initiatives on the screen, are adjacent. So things which are complementary to what the company is already doing. Think of, we sold items before, now let's launch a subscription program. Or, hey, we know that you can sample stuff in a grocery store, you can try cosmetics or beauty products or some food. How would you replicate a similar experience on the platform? We launched Prime Samples. But probably when we're asked that question about how do you guys make fantastic bets like Alexa or AWS, fortunately or unfortunately, after showing this slide, I have to make one more click. This is the click. That out of the ideas which were presented, many failed. And you guys, I'm pretty sure, are familiar with A/B tests. Many of those fail pretty regularly, more than 50% of A/B tests. But the same happens with adjacent and huge businesses, which were an investment of hundreds of people's time, like Fire Phone, which is probably the most famous failure of Amazon. So that's why we present this pyramid. You have to make many bets to catch an outlier. Why? Because if you think about the slide that we already demonstrated to you, about the 20 bets, 15 will fail, 3, 4 will generate 2, 4x return, but one, a single deal, may return the whole fund. This is exactly the same mindset that many technology leaders like Amazon, Google, NVIDIA, Microsoft, they all think in this kind of a big bet to catch an opportunity, not to lose one.
And by the way, for those of you who work in large organizations here, ask yourself, what would have happened to your senior executive if they would just have lost $800 million? What do you think would happen to them? Well, this would happen to the senior executive at Amazon. Amazon decided to compete with iPhone and started Fire Phone. After $800 million, the Fire Phone project was canceled. And yet, the senior executive who was in charge of Fire Phone was not punished, was not fired, but in fact, it was announced that the scale of failures should increase as the business is becoming larger. And in fact, that senior executive not only stayed, but continued to be the leader at Amazon, and then was in charge of number of...
And Alexa and Echo, things that we currently think is the big win. So again, behind many big wins, there are so many failures. So if you think that failure is not an option, think twice.
So I think what Jeff Bezos might have told this senior executive whom he decided not to fire, he could have told him, I have just spent $800 million on your education. So recommend this to your CEOs, okay?
Okay. And innovation is not an overnight success. The thing here is that we're all familiar with Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Forbes article when something is already so popular, so phenomenally great, that it becomes a phenomenon by itself. The truth is that VCs tend to, and that's their job, to find innovative ideas very early on. I mean, probably what all people, my apologies, something is a bit wrong with my microphone, so hopefully you can still hear me. So we're all now familiar with about ChatGPT and AI and OpenAI. Like if I open my LinkedIn thread, it's all about AI. We probably have to now rename LinkedIn AI. Or maybe we have to create a filter not about AI. I'm, by the way, guilty as well. I also post about AI. But look, that idea and that, in essence, startup was not that popular. If you look at the search interest, that was pretty low back then. Interesting enough, I was actually at the AWS AI ML team, and I talked to research scientists, and I was impressed by what computer vision could do back then, way before OpenAI ChatGPT became so popular and known. But one person in this room knew that. This is the guy. Why? Because he's collecting information about startups, and the moment when they hit billion-dollar valuation or around that, he's getting interested. He receives an immediate notification. And all of very famous startups, before they hit Wall Street Journal headlines, they typically start to be noticed by VC investors. This is why. And OpenAI, you may know that it was founded way back before all of that ChatGPT mania started to be true. So, one piece of advice. If you want to predict the future, have a look at where VCs invest today. I can guarantee that 5-7 years from now, many of these ideas will become pure nonsense. However, some of these ideas will become as transformational as many of the ones which are now on the slide, from SpaceX to Airbnb that we regularly use, Uber, Stripe, Zoom, all of them.
One important comment. Many people think, after looking at the slides, is that VCs are geniuses who really predict the future. I don't think that VCs are geniuses who predict the future. The VCs are geniuses in designing for the future, which means that you don't need to be able to predict the future. You need to be able to design the process so that you are going to catch some of the companies, some of the ideas that will evolve into dominating our future. And that I think what smart VCs are really, really good at.
Here's some stats. Any VC investor actually has to be very patient, and that's what we share with corporate leaders as well, because that's very important to be aware. If you invest today to get the result from your innovative bets next quarter, well, unfortunately, that's not going to be the case. Why? Because we now have statistics. It's all about how much time it takes. How long does it take for a company to reach a unicorn status? Actually, it's taking even longer to get to the IPO or any exit. So patience is critical here. And therefore, long-term approach rather than short-termism is key. And if you expect that next quarter, next year, you plan to demonstrate to your CEO a payback, most likely that's not going to be the case. And I would just use the example from a company that I worked for, Amazon. If you look at the key huge businesses which are now growth and profit generating, marketplace, AWS, advertising business, or Prime program, they all started very small. It took a while to make it work, and more importantly, they all became big only years down the road. Why? Because that was the philosophy of Jeff Bezos, and that's why we decided to put a quote, and we share this quote with our clients as well, that Amazon's ready to wait for 5 to 7 years after planting a seed to see whether that become a big, huge tree that will now become the new growth engine. It doesn't mean that the management is not paying attention to that business next month or next quarter or next year. They do. But the true payback, the true bet is 5 to 7 years. It's kind of a long time horizon. Keep that in mind. So when you all already are, as business leaders, keep that. Probably that philosophy allowed Amazon to out-compete, or I would rather use the word out-innovate their competitors and be an everything store. I think important thing is to keep in mind that we constantly, regularly overestimate of the effect of technology, but we underestimated the effect in the long run. And think about everything that we discussed today on LinkedIn and all these hypes. Yes, we do believe, or tend to believe, that everything will change next year. Probably not. But mid-term, long-term, you will see the impact.
Okay, let's go to the ninth myth, that there is only one way to innovate. Let's have a look. The reality is that if we look at large organizations, they can innovate in many different ways. There is improving internal innovation, which is very difficult, but if done correctly, is absolutely amazing. And some examples are on the left. There's corporate venture capital. So my team at Stanford studied every single corporate venture capital fund in the United States and hundreds of corporate venture capital units around the world. And the reality is, unfortunately, that most corporate venture capital units are not very successful. They are not successful financially. They're not successful strategically for their company. That is because they're not designed properly. But then there are some examples of absolutely amazing CVC funds, CVC units, that are very successful financially and at the same time helping the organization succeed. And then acquiring innovation. There's a lot of talk about antitrust regulation these days, but the reality is that there is a continuing increase in acquiring innovation M&A. Founders here, if your startup is quite successful, there is still a high chance you're going to be acquired rather than going public, statistically. And the question is, who is going to acquire you and how they're going to acquire you? And for large organizations, all these three circles overlap. And so we've seen organizations where CVC actively helping the internal innovation, internal R&D to succeed, and then helping to integrate the innovation that has been acquired. Okay, let's go to the 10th myth, and this is now for policymakers, who I know came from Central Eurasia here. So first is that I'm often asked whether Silicon Valley is dead or almost dead. Well, it isn't. There are 1,000 people here. Okay. We still have around 50% of every unicorn in the United States, actually more, in the United States, in California, and most of them are in Silicon Valley. And most VCs who are making the best deals are still in Silicon Valley. So the death of Silicon Valley is highly exaggerated again and again. I think that is going to continue. Having said that, I believe that the future is going to be a multi-hub world, which means that every single region, including Central Eurasia, will have a major innovation hub, that, like a spoke and the wheel, will connect to other innovation hubs. I also think that, and my research suggests that very different regions can really afford to have only one innovation hub. And so it remains to be seen which hub will become one in Central Eurasia. For the policymakers here, and maybe for everybody else, the venture capital impact over the last 50 years has been really massive. The reality is that the venture capital industry in most part is behind in American economic growth over the last 50 years. So here are some numbers that I show again and again, and every single time it continues to surprise people. If you look at every single company that went public in the United States in the last 50 plus years, every second company was venture-backed. And out of every dollar that is spent by all these companies on R&D, which is the growth, the engine of private growth, 92 cents is spent by companies that used to be primarily venture-backed when they were small, high-growth startups. And 7 out of 10 top companies in the US right now were venture-backed. And if we compare this to other countries around the globe, for example, G7 countries minus the US, so Canada, France, Italy, the UK, Germany, Japan, there's a huge difference. None of those very successful countries produced new large companies in the last 50 years. And the reason is because those economists never developed the venture capital industry. And here is maybe the most significant outcome of my research on venture capital. Had there been no venture capital industry in the US, starting approximately in the early to mid 1970s, many of the companies that we know today, from Apple and Microsoft and Cisco and Intel, to Google and Facebook and Airbnb and Uber and others, would not have existed. Because have you ever heard of French Google? Have you ever heard of Italian NVIDIA? Have you ever heard of Japanese Airbnb? There is a reason. And the reason is that venture capital caused most of these changes. So this is just a quick example, a tale of two countries, the United States versus Italy, and I can do the same for every single other developed country. This shows the year when those countries, largest companies in the US and Italy were born. And Italy has not produced a single large company in the last 50 years. Thank you all again, and please read the book in every possible language.
One more thing. We would love to thank you guys specifically, because without your support, we would probably never become a national bestseller, the book of the month, etc., etc. Why? Because one day, someone asked me, look guys, you are doing some crazy stuff on social media. You are like everywhere, people post books with you. Which company have you hired to do all that for you? And the truth is that was pretty much two of us doing all the work and just asking friends to share online if they liked any of the ideas in the book, to share with their communities and to spread the word. So my ask from this meeting, from this talk, is spread the word. Would really appreciate that. Hopefully more languages are coming, and therefore more people will be able to read results of research of Ilya's team and all of the interviews that we conducted. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.